Good evening, everyone. I hope I am audible properly. Uh, and welcome all our participants here in Zoom and Facebook and YouTube Live. This is Rudranaran Das. Take this opportunity to warmly welcome you all to World Human Sciences and Management Conference 2021 and 22. Invitations to global dialogue on agnotological context, disciplinary practices of social sciences and policy frames. An initiative towards think time and rethink episteme. Distinguished participants, partakers, it's a glorious moment to extend my warm wishes on behalf of Center for Adivasi Research and Development. As this international conference is built with an intake of active and interactive learning and discussion organized by Center for Adivasi Research and Development in collaboration with Indian Institute of Management, Sambalpur, Central University of Odisha, Koraput, and Ravenshaw University, Cuttack. On behalf of Center for Adivasi Research and Development, I want to convey my heartfelt gratitude to our honorable patrons, Professor Sanjay Kumar Naik, Vice Chancellor, Ravenshaw University, Professor Mahadev Joyswal, Director, IIM Sambalpur, Professor Sarath Kumar Palita, Vice Chancellor, Central University of Odisha. The convener of this largest virtual conference are eminent Indian historian, Professor Chandi Prasad Nanda, and eminent policy activist, writer, and philanthropist, Mr. Charukdat Panikahit. Dear friends, the main outcome of this conference is to come up with the national and international framework for the education system in future. The crux of this conference will be the use of digital technologies such as artificial intelligence, augmented reality, and virtual reality that is being increasingly adopted after the outbreak of COVID pandemic. We hope this conference would help students, faculties, researchers, and all to expand their mental horizon and help the education system to adopt the best in future. Ladies and gentlemen, our organization, Center for Adivasi Research and Development, is a leading research-oriented institution promoting ethnographic, empirical, and evidence-based research for engaging and addressing the challenges that 21st century globe is facing today. Our prime agenda is to come up with potential policy solutions for social change while believing in the idea of debate, dialogue, and discussion. Our institution focuses on marginalized communities and works for their livelihood to protect the nature, culture, language, and identity in particular. Dear friends, the age of modernity has witnessed that change is the only constant phenomena for societal purpose to enhance knowledge. Our information work on them is methodical and avoids paradoxically framework which is neglected so many centuries from theory to become practice. Center for Adivasi Research and Development sincerely believes in the idea, in the concept of social marketing, which is seriously looking for non-profit marketing and builds new social entrepreneurship for check and balance mechanism to glorify generations to come. Center for Adivasi Research and Development come to serve with the holistic approach of critical thinking in education to fill the gaps and to plan accordingly for the voiceless communities. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me a tremendous contentment to introduce the most esteemed personality of today's symposia is none other than Professor Aditya Raj. Professor Aditya Raj is an excellent sociologist, an associate professor of Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, Indian Institute of Technology, Patna, where he has been teaching since May 2010. Before joining IIT Patna, he was at the University of British Columbia, Vancouver. Dr. Aditya completed his PhD as a Commonwealth Fellow in 2007 from McGill University, Canada. Dr. Aditya has a MA in Sociology from Jamia Millia Islamia and MPhil from Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. He has been involved with RC4 Migration and Diaspora Studies of the Indian Sociological Society in 2013 Dr. Aditya was a recipient of M.N. Srinivas Memorial Prize of the ISS. He was presented and published with various national and international forums, including those of a Canadian Sociological Association, American Sociological Association, and International Sociological Association, and of course, Indian Sociological Association. Dr. Aditya is known for his work on migration and diaspora studies, as well as on contemporary development discourses in India. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the audience and on behalf of Center for Adivasi Research, we wholeheartedly welcome Dr. Aditya Ji to World Human Science and Management Conference. Sir, your topic is, as suggested by you, is policy deliberation on migrant minorities in India, which will be definitely be an eye-opening session for all of us. With this note, I would like to stop here and invite Professor Aditya Ji to initiate his talk. Over to you, sir.
Good evening, everyone. I hope I'm audible. And
yes,
yeah, thank you, Vikram, for getting in touch and for doing this. It is an immense pleasure to be talking through the Center of Adivasi Research. And as I begin, I want to congratulate all of us for having selected the President of India, who is from this community. And if not anything, at least it is a symbolic beginning for many good things to come for people at the margins. So today, as you know, I will be talking about and maybe initiating more discussions around the topic of migration, and especially the policy discourse or lack of it, a concrete policy discourse. So I was talking to Vikram and he suggested that I'll have time, 45 minutes to an hour or so. So I'll keep the pace as such and continue the discussion. If at any point of time, if I am logged out or if I'm not audible, please let me know. So as I begin, by thanking Vikram and by conveying my greetings for choosing the President of India from the Adivasi community, I also want to thank all my colleagues who have joined here, senior and junior, and everybody else who is looking at this point of time on a Friday evening, as well as all those who will take opportunity to glance over it at some point or the other. So as we begin, we must know that India has a very rich history and amazing diversity. The social formation and cultural patterns of a land reveals that people have migrated to this land in different time and space from, I don't believe in Aryan invasion or nor any other kind of invasion, but I believe that people came in different time and from different places, and this all led to the diversity here, creating more diversity, intermingling, learning to live together. We also had people going from here to different parts of the world. The Chola empires were pioneers, and before that, from Bihar, during the time of Buddha, and then spreading its gospels, Asoka played a very, very important role. So thereafter also we had people going from this part of the land to different places. So although we'll be talking about how people have moved from here, the kind of difficulties and the obstacles they have faced, and how if there are provisions, things can be made better for them to have a better, good lived experiences. But a glance at history is important to situate the discussion. So as I said, this land reveals mobility of people in its social formation and cultural patterns. It reveals how ideas and practices have intermingled and how synthetic forms of livelihood have been created over a period of time. Just to situate a little bit more in history, I must tell you that during the time of Asoka, for instance, we had provisions for people who were mobile in different places. And I say this on the basis of certain historical documents, for instance, the Girnar Rock Edicts. So this is the first reference I let you know. Girnar Rock Edicts talks about the intent of the governing elite at that point of time to take care of the mobile populace, whether traders or for other people moving in and out. Even Suri made remarkable efforts for people who were moving for better life experiences from one place to another. Not that there were not other people in history, but I mark them two important people from this land, from where I'm talking today. So over a period of time, we have had provisions of taking care of people. In our history, in our culture, in our religion, we have provisions of how good we are to the guest, to people who come to us. You know, Aditi Devo Bhava, how we are good to people, we must be good to people. So all this things we keep on hearing. And the reason I'm saying this is because at some point of time when I'm winding my discussions, I want to refer where have these ideas gone of being good to people who come to our land, to our house, to our neighborhood. Where have these ideas, where have these cultural practices gone? So as I said, India is rich in history. We had people moving in, moving out, and this has all led to the diversity, the abundance of practices, of culture, of syncretic life being together. Now, I can't delve in history so much, but let's start at the time of the British, when the British came and they were governing us for one reason or the other. And that is where you have many policy documents from where we draw. Even the Constitution of India draws heavily from the Government of India Act of 1935. So during the British rule in India, the deindustrialization policy of those governing us from London and the commercialization of agriculture, you can read more from historians like Amir Bakht and others. These led to what we call impoverishment in rural areas in different parts of the world. And as I give you examples of Sirsa, Suri, and Asoka from the land that I'm talking to you today from, similarly in this land, Amir Bakht's work is celebrated, and he talks about how it created, a people who are readily willing to go to different places for job, for livelihood. And that is the point where at the world level, slavery was being abolished. So at the world level, you have slavery being abolished. And here in India, you have a situation where you have a big chunk of population, which is waiting to be employed. And that's where you must understand that this policy, it's not a unilinear, it's a complicated conversation. So one thing happening at the global level, and the colonial masters found laborers available, and through the process of endangered, we have the earlier examples of people going to Fiji, Suriname, and all those plantation economies. So the endangered diaspora setting. So the policies at the world level of abolishing slavery created people who almost like slaves, endangered laborers, contractual laborers, going for 5 years, going not knowing anything about the land they were going. They were just going because they needed something to hang on to, something to earn. So during the British period, there were hordes of people going in and settling different places. And the colonial masters were huge in this. I'll just remind you of how the triangle trade between India and China, and of course the ruling elite was setting. People coming to grow, tobacco here, and how it was. And despite their whole effort to move people to the plantation economy and the triangle trade, they were not good to mercantile communities within the land. For instance, there were proper hatred towards criminal tribe, and they had tax of calling certain tribal communities as criminals, the Banjaras. So on the one hand, the British, while they promoted endangered laborers, hello, I hope I'm audible, all right? Okay, so while on the one hand, they kept on promoting people to go to different colonial economies here in India, they were not good to mobile populace. Let me remind you that when they had the mercenaries, people fighting for them, who came from different places and how they raised here, they raised these people from who were readily available and removed from agriculture. Even so, they wanted people, but they also wanted people to be controlled and mobility controlled as much as they can. So a strong labor movement developed along with independence movement. As a result of pressure and struggle from labor unions and nationalist leaders, colonial rulers were forced to make important labor legislations like the Workmen's Compensation Act of 1923 or the Workmen's Compensation Act of 1923 and the Payment of Wages Act of 1936. So this is pre-independence India, but these legislations they did not recognize the heterogeneity of the labor. And as I'm talking for the Center of, as you said, tribal studies, you must understand that they were very, very, unfair to people and give them tax, criminal tax. So these two legislations were important markers. These laws did not recognize the existence of large number of rural to urban or inter-provincial migrants, which were mainly concentrated in provincial capitals of then Madras, Bombay, Calcutta. So why, so on the one hand, as I move ahead, I want to close this section. As I move ahead, close this section saying that on one hand, they were looking for laborers and move them to different places in the plantation economy and to their army to fight the local populace. They were not very pro of allowing people to move to one places to another, especially in view of the psychic fear that labor legislations were brought in, these two acts that I told you. And then when India became independent, so without losing much time, let's go to the time when India became independent. So when India became independent, we inherited and carried on these migration or migrant blind policy framework. Of course, there was a lot of refugee crisis created by the partition of the subcontinent, in which most of the cities, in North India, of course, here in East India, were partitions. And we had, if you look at the social formation of, say, a city like Delhi, you have Kalka Ji, where a lot of people coming from Pakistan were given pattas to settle down. And you have EPDP, East Pakistan Displaced People Colony, or Chittaranjan colony that you have in Delhi. So people going from Bangladesh. So although they were settling, and because of this crisis created by partition, refugees at the door in different places, there was something which the administration sort of thought about. We can call it migration phobia. There was this big migration phobia, not allowing people to move. They were discouraged. There were various legislations which discouraged for people to move from one place to another. But I don't want to go into that because I have a long trajectory to map for you before I come to today's discussion and take you to what Niti Aayog is trying to do, and we look forward to that. So for the first time after 1947, in 1948, we had the Minimum Wages Act, which was enacted just 1 year after. And there weren't any proper or substantial benefit to people. So Minimum Wages Act, this act was implemented by the Ministry of Labor and Employment. There were many discrete situations there. There were provisions of how much wages should be, which was not followed because migrant laborers were not able to negotiate. And after 1948, my note says that the next time we have was in 1970, which was the Contract Labor Regulation Abolition Act. This law prevented exploitation of contractual laborers and also to introduce better conditions of work. Under this, a workman shall be deemed to be employed within course contract labor or in connection with the work of an establishment when he is hired or in connections with such work by another contractor. So it was like if you need to be in contract, and you can see parallel of what the British government was trying to do. So here also within the land, we were trying to create a a situation of our contract. Now in 1976, thereafter, we had equal remuneration acts and rules, especially covering for gender. So men and women, bringing them at par. Again, look, this was all about laborers. Laborers. There was nothing specific or anything about migrants. So these were all migrant blind, color blind, as you say, migrant blind. Now, we had several other provisions in 2008. Also, we had in 1996. I'll come to that to you. But let me point out in sequence, after 1976, this Regulation of Employment and Conditions of Service Act of 1979. And because I'm talking for a center which is situated in Odisha, it was the government of Odisha, we must know, which first introduced the need for a special legislation to regulate the migration of workers from the state. There was this whole corridor of labor migrants from Odisha, which still is there, to Andhra Pradesh, now even then to Gujarat and other places. So this migration labor system was also known as Dadan labor, which existed, and it was very exploitative in nature. The contractors were, got people together. So this Odisha Dadan Labor Control and Regulation Act of 1975, 76, by 79, the government of India was able to bring in. So government of India learns many things from these act of Odisha, the Odisha Dadan Labor Control and Regulation Rules of 1975. And they set up a committee, a compact committee in 76. And by 70, then in February 1977, there was something. And by 79, we had the State Migrant Workmen Regulation and Employment and Conditions of Service Act. So it was a big leap, supposedly. But again, the contractors were very smart, very smart. This is the whole story about migrants in India. Let me tell you a line from a note, which I find very, very interesting. The kind of networks that facilitated migrants of who will go from where were all controlled by what I call greedy intermediaries, who would want to make money for themselves and considered the laborers, migrant laborers, especially as totally under non-human conditions. So although we are in 70s, but we're still not able to do much. So thereafter, in the 80s, we had a lot of hue and cry. And by 1996, we had Building and Other Constructions Regulations Act, which was like, sort of trying to help the laborers to settle down and not get exploited. But here, laborers, if they were migrant laborers, they were one step down and not able to negotiate anything, and a lot dependent on the sardars. So this goes on, and we are totally blind to the migrants. And you would believe that the new economic policy of 1991 opened a lot of corridors, changed the economy, and sort of precipitated the need for a lot of laborers. But what happens? Doesn't bring anything new for the migrants. Nothing. Even the Building and Other Construction Workers Regulation Act 1996 or the Workmen Compensation Act, as I told you, was not able to make a lot of changes. We had the Payment of Wages Act revised from 1936 in 2017 and trying to sort of fix wages for people. Something that we must pay attention to was about the Child Labor Prohibition and Regulation Act of 1986. Now, we had a lot of attention paid then. We wanted to control child labor. Have we been able to? It is something we must ask ourselves. Child labors. Lot has been done of how people are exploited. For instance, the Bonded Labor Act of 1976. This act abolished bonded labor system across India and relieved every bonded laborer of his or her obligation to do this kind of a labor. It also made agreement, but they were mostly void, by which a person or his dependent cannot be forced any thereafter. So anyone who forces a person into bonded labor were imprisoned for up to 3 years, and a little fine of 2,000 was there. And you know how this racket work of flesh trade or bonded labor or child labor. In all of these, sometimes we, when we talk about migrants, we only try and look at able-bodied men going from one place to another, especially in that corridor. If it is Odisha going to Andhra Pradesh, further down south as far as they can go. I was in Kerala in December, and we could see a lot of people from Odisha, from Bengal, from Assam, from Bihar, of course. And I was talking to somebody who told me that you can look at the profession in which they are employed once they have come, and this is from Kochi, and you can make out who are these people and from which places. If they are working for, say, fisheries, they must be from Bengal. Animal husbandry, in road construction, they must be from Bengal. If they're into meat cutting, they must be from Jharkhand, Assam. And I thought it was more like a commonsensical understanding. But I spent an afternoon and I was introduced to a little bit that I could see there, and just probably right. So these corridors, when we look at migrants, we see them. We don't look at the bonded laborers, which formed a big segment in the trajectory since independence in our country, or child laborers, or women who were left behind, or children at present time, or elderly. They have especially been not looked into, and this is at a time and in a country of ours, and I'm very proud about it. You can look at my background. I took help from my adolescent son to get this background done. At a time and in a country where the normative practices are drawn from the Constitution of India, which guarantees freedom of movement for all citizens. The foundational principles of free migrations are enshrined in clauses D and E of Article 19(1) of the Constitution. 19(1) of the Constitution of India guarantees all citizens the right to move freely throughout the territory of India and reside and settle in any part of the territory of India. I'm drawing from this book on Constitution by Kashyap, Subhas Kashyap, that book I have from my student days. Similarly, Article 15, it prohibits discrimination based on place of birth, among other grounds, while Article 16 guarantees equality of opportunity for all citizens in matters of public employment, and in particular prohibits the denial of access to public employment on the grounds of place of birth or residence. So in the Constitution, you have Article 19, which guarantees you movement. Article 15, which says you should not be discriminated based on your place of birth, among other grounds. And you look at what is happening to people from one part of the country to another. Say, and over a period of time, there was a point of time when people of South India, how they were looked up in Mumbai, or people from Bihar, in Assam, or different places. Now, all I say is Constitution guarantees us. Article 19, D and E specifically, Article 15, Article 16. So the Constitution of India has provisions relating to the conditions of employment, non-discrimination, right to work. Under the Article 21, 23(1), trafficking of human beings and beggars, menial laborers. Menial laborers is not mentioned, but trafficking of human beings and beggars and other similar forms of forced labors are prohibited. And any contravention of this provision shall be offense punishable under the law. So Article 23. Article 24, and I'm not a political scientist, I'm a sociologist, but I want to understand how the social relations between people, between communities, between one and the other community, how this is, if there are obstacles and how good they are, how sociability and civility is there. But I draw from this and I put before you to discuss and take it further. Similarly, Article 24 prohibits child labor under the age of 14 in a factory or mine or any other hazardous employment. Similarly, so we talked about Article 16, Article 15 and 16, Article 23, 24, you have Article 38, 1 and 2, Article 39, Article 41, 42, 43, which ensures social security of workers. India, social security. India is also, so I don't know to take you to all these articles, but a quick glance from a sociologist like me to different provisions that we have in the Constitution, Article 19, 15, 16, 19 comes start because it says you are free to go any place you want to, where you find an employment. And then Article 16 guarantees you equality of opportunity. Article 15 says no discrimination based based on your place of origin or anything. Article 23 says no trafficking. Article 24 prohibits child labor or any other employment in a fact. Article 38, 39, 41, 38, 1 and 2, 39, all of it, 41, 42, 43, ensures social security of workers. Now, if you look at the international level, where India is also a member of ILO, International Labour Organization, and has ratified many ILO conventions. As per 7th schedule of Indian Constitution, Article 246, under entry 81 of the Union list, state, interstate migrants or intrastate migrants, provided by the government of India. It provides, it gives you all the guarantees. But where are we? Has the Constitution of India not been able to inform our conscience through whatever processes it might be, through the right process of education or the fear of law, whatever it might be? So it looks like we have not been able to, and I don't want to brood upon the condition of the migrants which has happened. We have been talking a lot about them, especially during the COVID and how harassment they had. And thereafter, COVID, for all the bad it has done, one thing it did, it brought the migrants and the conditions at the forefront. It was a stark reality in the face of everyone. So we need a comprehensive migration policy, very, very comprehensive policy. Migration is not a new phenomenon, but the realization and the magnitude of dependence on migrant labor force in the development process is certainly recognized, especially during COVID. How, for instance, when the migrants were not needed, they were locked down, they were asked to fend for themselves, or when the lockdown was being revealed, a little paddle was being removed, COVID was giving us some respite, the factory owners, they wanted them back. So they were calling them back. I remember going for my JE exam duty, and finding an afternoon to go and see the bus station at Sambalpur. Buses were sent from Rajasthan and Punjab to take back the laborers. And this was a partial lockdown time. So you see, the contribution of the migrants if not more, there's at least 10% of India's GDP. And they serve as the backbone of several important activities. Construction, for instance, textile, apparel, several domestic works, fishing, fish processing, mining, quarrying, even agriculture. that is what pulls the Bihari laborers to Punjab. So the economy is dependent on migrants, and the number of migrants, even according to the Census of India 2011, is at least 37%. So you have about 50 crore migrants, and yet we don't have a comprehensive migration policy. So I brought to you the historical background, and I plead before you, using the Constitution's different provisions, that the Constitution guarantees these opportunities and no discrimination and to migrants, and yet and then the COVID reveals before you the importance of migrants. So what kind of policy document we need? And I'm not talking about international migrants. At some point of time, I would be interested to discuss them as well. Now, international migrants, if you look at divide both the national and the international, I think the international migrants are probably treated at least fairly well by the government of India. It is a different situation than in Fiji. You have seen that although demographically they might be more, but the polity is controlled by other community. Although they might be controlling the economy, but yet the polity is not controlled by them. They go to the educated labor force is educated. They go to US, they make US, they want to come back. Of course, there's a lot of contribution of the diaspora. We are only looking at what the state can do, because in a socialist republic, you look up to the state as especially at a time when different forces of the dynamics of the labor and capital comes binding on people, especially at the margin, who are meant to fend for themselves. So this is very, very important to think about. We need to have a policy which can create a enabling environment for migrant workers that stimulates the enterprise, enhances the productivity, safeguards their autonomy, right? The constitutional provision says that they cannot be discriminated. One is free to move. I'm in Patna today, I can go to another places. Now, I am having a question in WhatsApp, that I'm a little passionate, and why so? Because just to, without breaking the flow of the discussion, I feel myself to be always living in a place away from home. I am from rural Bihar. I studied in a convent school away from home. And then by the time I completed my high school, I moved to another place. So I kept on remembering my school, my first home, or my second home. And then I was in Delhi for about a decade, doing my bachelor's and my master's and working for some time. And then I moved to Canada for my higher education, PhD and postdoc, and a little bit of teaching at University of British Columbia. So migration and moving has been part of my life trajectory also. And so maybe that passion comes from there. Thank you. So the objective of the policy should be that it should address the dignity and basic right of migrants as a citizen of this country. They should be provided the floor level, not much, floor level security to all migrants. Their strength and must be identified. And we must have, above all, an effective implementation policy to see through. So when done, it will sort of create conditions where the migrants will be visible. Today, we have a situation where the migrants are almost invisible. So much, 37, 38%, according to Census of India 2011. And so where are the migrants? We all are in some way or the other. We are fragmented. Many of us are in informal economy. Many of us don't get counted when we move for education, for instance, or when we move for as seasonal migrants for some time. You're leaving behind children and sometimes leaving behind parents. So the whole issue of invisibility, fragmentation, and informality, which is there, must be paid attention to. So the crux of this is the question about representation. There are a lot of language barriers, you see, about invisibility, language barriers which the migrants face. Due to low social capital and lack of social support, they are away from, because they're away from the native place where they have their connections, where they have been in the social structures. Migrants have low bargaining capacity or power. And especially, I've been thinking about and talking and pitching about how, if the migrants have better skill, they have better bargaining capacity. So because of low social capital and lack of social support that we sociologists talk about without using much of the sociological jargons, we say that because of this, they face abundant exploitation. They're engaged in low menial level work. They have debt burden at native place, which further aggravates the situation. They have children, women left behind, unhygienic conditions, and this brings us to the next point. Besides fragmentation, invisibility, to the whole issue of public health. Migrants and public health, bad situation. Migrant workers, being a non-native populace, remain vulnerable and exposed to many health problems. Most of the health problems of migrants are ascribed to their migrant areas. A decreased awareness about local health care facilities, inability to cope up with psychological stress, unhealthy sexual practices, of course, frequent migrations, environmental hazards, food insecurity. So they're exposed to increased risk of developing CVD, cardiovascular disease, and STDs. Significant correlation is found between the duration of migrations and some of these diseases. One of my PhD student, Manish Kumar, he started working on migrants, and he was looking at how these migrants from Bihar, when they go and work in Punjab and Delhi and Calcutta, they must be sending remittances, but actually more than the remittances, they brought back a lot of these diseases. We are not talking the thin air. A lot of research has been done on this. And we say that there must be provisions. There must be provisions. Today, they are having, for instance, there is Mohalla clinic in Delhi. But these people say, for instance, from Bihar and Odisha, they are not counted. One of the things that is happening these days for them to be recognized is the discussions. And I think people like Professor Aswini Kumar of TISS must be congratulated for keeping the focus there of getting the migrants the voting rights. You see, many of the migrants are, whether you are skilled, unskilled, for work or for education, or seasonal or semi-permanent, you are not voting. And he talks about in his papers, his deliberations of how migrants have not been voting. And so their strength, their capacity to negotiate with the local governance is diminished. With the voting rights to come, so to say, sooner or later, I think it will give them the capacity to organize themselves and seek, some of the things that is not given to them. And skill development is one of them. The unorganized sector is dominated by micro enterprise, unpaid family members, casual laborers. So skilling and reskilling will provide better employability, improved wages and working conditions. Housing and water sanitation, this is again big issue. The kind of, according to Census of India 2011, for instance, it is found that India has 1.7 million homeless residents, of whom 1 million are in the metropolitan cities, with population above 4 million. Since housing is a central issue of dignity and respect, people under the bridges, flyovers, flyovers that connect us and smoothens our life, connecting us to the airports and our destinations. They are the refuge. They are the refuge of many of our countrymen. So housing and sanitation, short-term rental housing opportunities, COVID exposed them. how in Delhi they were asked to leave. Some people were nice and good. They said, no rent, you can leave. But, and COVID exposed the big financial insecurity that was there. I mean, maybe with more political inclusion, with voting rights, people will be able to negotiate and seek more social protection compared to how it has been. One of the other issues besides this, cultural identity, public health, and negotiating is about education. Now, with the enactment of Right to Education Act in 2009, authorities are obliged to guarantee the schooling of children from migrant families. Yet, say for instance, Census of India 2011, it throws light on massive challenge at hand. They say, the data, it says that about 11 million households in rural India that practice seasonal migration, the children there are not able to complete elementary education. And it actually pains me. We are increasing the reach of education, and then we see people who are neither here nor there, something that I use a jargon called, Trisanku, nor here, neither there. So, and especially if there is a situation of crisis or disaster, something, COVID-19 exposed us, or if there is a cyclone, Bengal, Odisha, anywhere, earthquake, natural calamities or unnatural calamities, fire in Sandy, and the slum is gone. So you have complicated situation further. So you see, there are very, very important gaps that are identified. Labor-related issues. Now, migrants are laborers, but you need to understand beyond labor. Laborers are only who dispense their working capacity. Migrants, we consider them that those who provide labor, but they're also human beings. Only difference is, instead of providing labor at their place of origin, they are moved to another place. So they are domiciled in another place, which is not their home, which is not enumerated as persons. So labor-related issues are there for migrants. Then there is administrative difficulty in implementing development programs, say in rural areas. So when you look at migrants, you must see them as getting uprooted from their place of origin and getting lured to go to a place where they settle down and are counted as migrants. During the British period, I referred to you about Ami Bakchi's work, where I said that deindustrialization and commercial agriculture was happening here. And so people are readily willing to move. They didn't have employment. Look at how, so today, for instance, you have Manrega or a state rural livelihood mission and other things, which says that some work should be given to people there to stop, especially the distressed migrants. But are they implemented properly? The reality. We have had provisions of, say, the Chief Minister initiative of livelihood in Jharkhand, the Jharcraft, or Shramik Mitra they had in Madhya Pradesh. So some provisions are there, but are they adequate? So labor, administrative difficulty. The most important, and during COVID, I could hear many webinars, is the lack of statistical data. They say it is very difficult to plan because why we don't have stock data. The census data is collected after a gap of 10 years. So, most states do not have data on migration, with some exception of, say, Odisha, Rajasthan, Jharkhand, Kerala. So some of these places are having. So we need to have both stock data as a census, which is, of course, in a decade, and it's not happening. Hope it happens soon, because people like us are looking forward to it. But we must also have dynamic data about migrants moving from one place to another, which is very, very essential to develop and understand and devise strategies to deal with migrants. The difference in wages across the state, for instance, when we have the data, we will be able to understand the difference in wages, how it is in one place and how it is in another place. Now, some of the important provisions that Government of India must look at is creating institutional structures for implementing a nationwide policy for migrants and migrant workers, which requires flexibility, driving dynamic data, and yet a good institutional design. Sociologists will tell you what are good institutions, which have good normative practices, rules for everybody, not that you have rules for only those people who collect data for some, not collect data for another. And it would be done some coordination at whether it is the state government doing it, rural urban bodies, or the panchayat, or the labor department. You have different departments. And one of the things that I'll tell you in about 2 minutes or so is that we need a nodal agency, because there are many departments. I have some place in my notes which says that there are n number of departments, and we need to sort of work through a process and bring all these departments together. Instead, if not, then this coherence will not be there. So we need to have a nodal agency, a ministry, which will bring together the provisions. I'm not saying that the government of India is absent, but here is the catch. There are different ministries. Say, for instance, Ministry of Health and Family Welfare talking about something. Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs talking about something. And they touch upon migrants at some point of time. Ministry of Education, Ministry of Tribal Affairs, Ministry of Rural Development, Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment, Ministry of Women and Children Development, Child Development, rural and urban bodies, many urban bodies. But there is no nodal agency to either bring all the provisions together and direct it, implement it for the migrants. And thereby, I think if this is done, this nodal agency can be the harbinger of change to collect the dynamic data which we have been talking about. So this, we must have. Otherwise, as I told you, there are places which like a Migrant Labor Commission, which monitors, evaluates. Then there is a special cell on migration. Then there's an interstate coordination committee. There are provisions, but what I'm pitching in towards the end, as I'm taking my time towards the conclusion, is that we must have a nodal agency. Tribal Affairs giving something, then Women and Children, ministries giving something. Here is a child moving, say, from Jharkhand, Gumla, unskilled, underaged, seeking employment for some reason, in a distress situation, vulnerable situation. Who comes in? Everybody wants to come in. Nobody wants to take the call. So a nodal agency would be very, very important. It can sort of bring together all the labor codes. There were 29 labor codes earlier. They have been brought together under 4 labor codes. And these codes deal with regulation of wages, 1, occupational and safety health, 2, social security, industrial relations. So how we have been able to do that, we must be able to sort of bring in, and in a transparent way, with timely payment of legally sanctioned wages, legally sanctioned, not exploiting. If there are vulnerable laborers who needing. I was looking at the trailer of this movie, which has been released or probably released today. Well Done, Jerry, or something. It is a story about a girl from Bihar, family from Bihar. It says, "Hum Bihar mein hum." So a distress situation, and so they are no negotiable situation, anything. But there must be a body, regulatory body to look at and catch hold of any miscreants that happens besides there being, So a nodal agency, intersectoral governance will be very, very important. And then, most importantly, as a sociologist, I think many of my sociology colleagues will agree to this, that it is at the community level, from where the migrants go, or at the community level where the migrants settle down, that there must be provisions of hand-holding, caring. We have smart city visions. I'm looking at Patna, smart cities. What is happening in the name of smart cities is very unsmart for people. So to elevate distress migration, policies are important, coordination committees, it will be good. There must be some way to keep a tab on the employers. The employers must provide basic provisions for workers, and law must, there are plenty of law. Enforcement agencies, this nodal agency, this coordinating ministry could look into this. The employers must ensure decent work standards along the supply chain and build credibility. And then there's so much informality. So some kind of formalization of these laborers, especially migrant laborers, even when unions are being formed and labor laws are, understood, the migrants are always at the back because they're new at the place. They are only getting their foot there. They're just trying to settle down. So however we talk about labor rights, and you evoke Karl Marx, I think it doesn't work, especially for people. They're always left behind. So there's multiple jeopardies, so to speak. The employer must disclose labor practices to stakeholders and have some ethical investing. They must promote social dialogue and ensure representation of migrant workers in all the decisions that is made by the employers for them. Trade unions are organizing, but mainstreaming, and they must mainstream migrant workers. They must promote bargaining capacity, and of course, civil society organizations are there, which are helping migrants. I think the Niti Aayog, I have heard, which is a very, very important body, is coming up with the help of some NGO or the support of non-governmental organizations, some kind of a very comprehensive policy document. And I think it is something that we must all look up to. I definitely do, because I hope it will bring in substantial changes in the life of the migrants. With this, I'll stop now, and probably we'll take some questions and further the discussion. Thank you. Do we have Vikram here?
Yes, sir.
So
thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much. Very wonderful delivery. It's a very informative and very catchy kind of information you highlighted and also light on it. Sir, when you talked about the migrant problems and the labor issue, you started with the journey of Indian migrants, the labor problem, and you cited many nodal agencies and nodal officers, what they have to do in coming futures. Sir, I will ask you a small thing. Everybody knows in the planet, India is a country of labor suppliers. If you look the states, particular the east belt of the country, West Bengal, Jharkhand, Bihar, and Odisha, these states are very prominent in knows how to supply labor throughout the world, and what kind of nodal agency to seek their look after at the any kind of circumstances, what you talked about pandemic, or what you just suggest the nodal officers can bring and take the many risk coverage of them and look after their families. Still today, after 75 years of independence, when we are going to celebrate Azadi Ki Amrut Mahotsav, so still today, we don't have data about the laborers, because in pandemic, we saw the trajectory and we saw the tragic happened with them. People are elsewhere moving around the railway station to bus stop to Hawaii Ada. Everywhere you saw the trajectory of labor and what kind of pain, what kind of suffer they have. Still they're working because they are the workers. Workers, they don't have any choice because they don't have in the class, the struggling class of Marx, they are not in class. They don't have belongs to any class, because now the lower class people almost taking and the top-down failure of this country policy as much as concern. What is your concern, sir?
Yeah, you are right, Vikram. This is what I was trying to pitch in, that we, discuss the trajectory. And then I said, we don't have documentation and data, especially dynamic data. We don't have data. We know that there are corridors around which there are a lot of migrants, especially from this part of the world, from Odisha. There is a chain, there is a network that takes them to Andhra Pradesh, further south, and to Gujarat. There are a lot of people from Odisha and Gujarat, of course, Delhi and other places, but there is this chain of migrants. Now from Bihar and UP to different places, Assam, Jharkhand. So we have this chain, but we don't have a data. Now, I'll give you an example. For instance, we wanted to do a project of mapping something about Bihari migrants. And I got a nod from a senior politician who said, we will fund this. And he said, let me send you to the department of so-and-so. So I go to the department, I meet the principal secretary, and they said, good. But we need to have people from that department. So several departments and none of the departments. So this is where I think, this is just an example. Similarly about public health provisions, Ministry of Tribal Affairs, Ministry of Women and Children. But there's from where everything is for everybody, but there's nothing for migrants. And look, we are talking about 38% people who are away from their home. So they are migrants. You can talk intrastate, within state, all kind of migrants. And I'm not even touching about international migrants. So we need to have a nodal agency, ministry, under which there must be provisions to collect data. Because when there is no data, and here I think we are all on the same page, when there's no data, people say, how do we plan? There's a famous quotations by Mrs. Gandhi who says, to plan when there's not much of a data, it's very difficult. So people usually quote that, and there are people like famous demographers and data. So how do we have data? We can't have data. We can't ask the migrants to report, because you remember they are going in a situation where they want food. They don't want to give data to the state. I mean, the state can collect data as well from different agencies. Maybe at the community level, the panchayat must be vibrant enough to know, or in urban areas, if you have somebody who has moved. Now, I think this is the reason I took the name of only one or two scholars. I think Aswini Kumar from TIS. Very, very important. Now, once they have voting capacity, voting power, I think it's working. It's getting in safe. It's being implemented, and the election commission has recognized it. It will sooner be. So you have people voting for you, and by voting, these people have a right to choose, and they are considered. In where the vote meant politics is, so much vote. So you go to Delhi, you see laborers from Bihar and Jharkhand or Eastern UP, and they make no sense to you, because but once they are voters, and as they are getting voters, as they are getting the voting rights, as they are settling down, so you have people being their representatives from their community, negotiating for them, and at least, if not as migrants, as members of communities who have settled down, they get more negotiating capacity there. So it's very, very important to have data, and for that, who collects the data? Agencies, maybe a ministry at the state level. It's very, very important. Sooner or later, we are going to have it. Sooner we have, better it is. For as you have Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So if something happens to somebody, they report at the consulate. All good. You have to renew your visa. You get it done there. But what happens to the migrants? Unless it is a severe case, and then media frames it up, and there are non-governmental agencies who are trying to help, and then the governmental agency comes in. So if there is an agency, there is a body, there is a ministry. So it will become obligatory on them. They'll be responsible for people. As for instance, you have education-related things. Now, migrant children's education is where? In the Ministry of Education? Yes, there is. I wanted to talk about NEP 2020 also. I wanted to talk about different provisions in different legislation, different policy documents in education, which allows for. One of my students is submitting thesis now. She's looking at left behind children of migrants in Bihar in one of the schools, the Jawahar Navodaya Vidyalaya, where how they go there and how it helps them. So the government created JNBs, but it is only informally there, and people who can collect information, who can use their social capital, go there and utilize the provisions. But those who are not able to, those who do not have the social capacity, they are too much drawn into fending for themselves and fulfilling their needs. They are not able to. So if there is a ministry, that ministry will have clear-cut directions that if there is anything about education, we get you from the Ministry of Education, these are the things. Or about health from Ministry of Science. So there you go. I'm repeating few things, but I want to highlight some of these things, and therefore I'm signposting that again and again about this nodal agency. It's true. You see, from the British time, and even today, when we want laborers, we send them buses. We send them through buses. I asked when last time I was there in October, and I said, did they give buses to send you back? They said, no, we came, but they said buses to pick you up. I said, okay. And what happens if you fall sick? They said, when they are sending buses to pick people up, they put us on those buses and we get some provisions. And you see, I'm talking about specifically labor, and you might be thinking I'm focusing on at the place of destination. But all of these happens because many of the policies are not executed properly at the place of origin. Therefore, we have a regional imbalance, regional development imbalance. Say, for instance, in Bihar, Odisha, Bengal, there are places where, say, I'll tell you about Bihar, many things are, in such bad state. Therefore, people are willing to move ASAP to wherever they can go. So it's a complicated conversation, and as complicated as it, there are different nooks and crannies which informs it, and a nodal agency will probably bring all the complaints, all the aspirations, all the problems together, document it, also create dynamic data, if not anything else, and then this will help us plan. Where do we focus? Who do we supply most? There is chain. I have been amazed by reading literature on how from the time of pre-independence and after independence, there was this whole chain which took people from one place to another. Now, if you want to take care of these people, especially in their vulnerable situations, we have how much people are there. And I think we get so much bogged down by international discourses of how something happened in Myanmar, and it's true, you do that. But you also look at people who are migrating from your doorsteps, from a neighborhood to another person's neighborhood within the country. And that is where I said they are invisible. So invisibility, fragmentation, and they are all fragmented. They may be all from Odisha or Bihar or Jharkhand, but they're all competitors in a very tough market situation without being able to negotiate their wages. Okay. Another question maybe. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much. Sir, do you believe and do you agree there is a sort of leadership crisis or leadership problem in particular Bihar, Odisha, Jharkhand, and West Bengal? That's why maximum numbers of labor migrant problems happened here, or anything related to policy planning or execution level? What is most important for this labor crisis should be solved?
Again, as I said, it's not either or, but it is a combination of all of these. Our leaders are as good as we are. We choose our leaders. If we choose a Lalu Prasad Yadav or a Mamata Banerjee or Nitish Kumar or Patna Sahab, whoever we choose, we choose them. Therefore, now, of course, a very vigilant and a careful and a strong leadership visionary leadership will pay attention to this. And sooner or later, they are going to pay attention. You know, in 1976, the Southern Labour Act in Odisha, from which the government of India learned. And by 79, they had provisions how to regulate, you know, especially this contractual laborers who were going under dadans, under sardars, the foremen. So a visionary leader is important, but I also think that it is upon the communities themselves to highlight these issues and of course be more empathetic and understanding and talk to the government, negotiate with them. And when it is done, then the role of the bureaucrats will become very, very important to implement, have right kind of policy, involve academics also who do research, involve not just the academics, but also non-government organization functionaries who know the crisis. And then have right kind of provisions and execute them to different nodal agencies. So government, of course, a visionary government will make different changes. You see, we had flag all the time. I realized the importance of the flag when I was in a distant land. To be very true, before that it was only certain days in a calendar year, 15th August, 26th January, and then you see today, and I think it is in the last few days after the Jindal Sahib won and every household was free to. And today we are in a situation, and I think I think it is going to look amazing when on the next national holiday in soon 2 weeks time, we are going to hoist the tricolor throughout the country. So this is also a plan of the leadership group, and the leadership is not just one person; it's a collective. It's a collective. Maybe one person is at the forefront, but it's a collective. It's a collective effort. So both your points, a good leadership is important, but also other stakeholders, including the community, including the migrants themselves. How much can you only be earning and not investing in creating situation where your labor capacity as well as your being is appreciated by everyone? So thank you, Vikram. We can talk more and take more questions if time permits for everybody.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much. Sir, we have an MOU with IIT Patna and Center for Adivasi Research and Development. This is, I think, it's a 5-year MOU for the sake of tribal development, policy chunk, and major education policy, how to introspect and visibility in a outreach kind of thing, and how to internationalizing these issues in a broader perspective, like multimodal formality of teaching, training, skilling, and research. Thank you so much, sir. With this note, I would like to invite Rudunaran to go for a formal vote of thanks. Thank you so much, sir, once again, and looking forward for future engagement. Thank you, sir.
We will talk more. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jena, for inviting me for a formal vote of thanks. Thank you, Professor Aditya, for your wonderful deliberation. When Dr. Nupur calling me and said about your contribution on the Indian academic, it was very convinced, and I was starting following your career, and it was quite impressive. And thank you so much when the people like you join the Center for Adivasi Research and Development and share your recent thought and your research and ideas with us. It was definitely a very important session for all of our researchers, students, and those outside audiences are watching us in Facebook Live. It was very impressive, and thank you so much for joining and sharing your valuable thoughts and ideas, particularly on several issues of Odisha and Bihar and Jharkhand and all these developing states. Thank you so much, sir, for your wonderful time and session. I would like to thank all the institutional support to Indian Institute of Management, Sambalpur, Ravenshaw University, and Central University of Odisha, Professor Naik, Professor Palita, and Professor Mahadev Joyswal for their institutional support to organizing such a wonderful session of these intellectual gathering. And also, I'd like to thank all the members of the Center for Adivasi Research and Development, and special thanks to Dr. Bikram Kesari Jena, who tried to gather all these intellectual minds and different researchers from different fields to share their ideas in a particular forum. And you will be very happy to listen, sir, that we are approximately doing 180 such type of intellectual gatherings where we are discussing about the burning issues of the society and international burning issues. So that's why we are very happy to have you here. Thank you so much, and thank you so much all the media persons are here, and also thank you so much all the members of the three associating institutions and members of CAT. Thank you. The meeting is concluded.
Good night.
Namaste, sir.